Hello everyone, I'm Yoya Komatsu from Aoyama Gakuin University in Japan. Today I'm going to talk about my study. The title is Transtiff, a stylus-shaped interface for rendering perceived stiffness of virtual object by a stylus stiffness control. This is Transtiff, a stylus-shaped interface that can render perceived stiffness of virtual object. We developed Transtiff to provide a realistic haptic experience by adjusting stiffness. In this study, we investigate how the stiffness of stylus influences haptic perception when touching object. While previous research has extensively explored the perception of object hardness and texture, the role of stylus stiffness remains underexploited. As related work, several haptic systems have been proposed to generate sensations of touching virtual objects. Here, incorporating vibrations with a voice coil motor to simulate the textures on virtual objects, and reproduce haptic sensation by controlling the air pressure at the tip of the interface using a jamming transition mechanism. However, they did not investigate stiffness perception during stylus interaction. Therefore, there is a need to understand stiffness perception during stylus interaction. Research on soft actuators and mechanisms for joints capable of flexibly altering their stiffness has progressed. McKeven artificial muscle that controls the extension, contraction, and flexion of actuators through pneumatic systems, and achieving significant stiffness changes by using layer jamming, a technique that induces a jamming transition in overlapping seats. Therefore, we thought that McKeven artificial muscle enable controlled stiffness in interfaces. So the aim of this study is to investigate how stylus stiffness affects haptic perception. We also explore how it can create haptic illusions, making a hard object feel soft. Specifically, we examine how different levels of stylus stiffness affect object perception during touch. Next, I talk about the conducted psychophysical experiment. The aim of this experiment is to examine whether users could discriminate which was softer, the stylus or the object, and to investigate the frequency with which participants experienced the illusion that a hard cylinder felt soft. Conditions included 2 visual stimuli, 7 styluses, 5 cylinders, and 2 grip types. We recruited 15 participants and they put on the HMD and touched the cylinder with the stylus attached to a tracker. They then see a soft stylus or a soft cylinder visual stimulus. They then answer whether the sensation of real softness is caused by the stylus or the cylinder. This slide shows the experimental environment. Cylinder is fitted with a spring mechanism underneath the double acrylic cylinder. The participant touches a soft stylus or a soft cylinder. This slide shows the result of the experiment. We calculate the correct responses rate when touching hard cylinder with a soft stylus and when touching a soft cylinder with a hard stylus. As a result, when using real soft stylus and looking at the virtual soft cylinder, the illusion of perceiving a real hard object as soft is more likely to occur. Now, I will discuss the experimental results. We observed significant differences in correct responses depending on the virtual stimulus condition. This suggests that humans rely on both haptic and virtual perception when judging object stiffness. Furthermore, we found that soft stylus can enhance the illusion of softness in hard objects, when combined with a soft visual stimulus. Now, I will give an overview of Transtiff. Transtiff is a stylus-shaped interface with a variable stiffness joint. It uses a McKeven-Aushan muscle to control joint stiffness, allowing users to perceive different haptic sensations. By adjusting the stiffness, we can modify how objects feel when touched. McKeven-Aushan muscles consist of two layers of tubes with a roller inside. When the piston pressurizes the roller, the inner silicon tube expands and the outer braided tube constrains to expansion and increase in the stiffness. Therefore, McKeven-Aushan muscle increases the stiffness. McKeven-Aushan muscle is integrated into the stylus tip to control stiffness. Feed screw motor moves the nut linearly, driving the piston motion. Encoder tracks motor revolutions to precisely control piston travel. This mechanism allows adjustment of stiffness for realistic haptic feedback. This video shows the hardest and softest states of Transtiff. As you can see, the softest Transtiff is easy to bend, where the hardest Transtiff is difficult to bend. This slide shows the measured stiffness of Transtiff. Using force gauge and movement measuring device, we measure the force required to bend Transtiff. We measure the maximum, half, and minimum stiffness that Transtiff can output. The results showed that Transtiff can change the stiffness. Next, I will talk about the evaluation user study that we conducted. The aim is to evaluate whether the Transtiff can simulate stiffness-based haptic feedback consistent in the material properties of virtual object. We recruited 12 participants. We prepared the three conditions for the Transtiff: maximum, half, and minimum stiffness, and three conditions for the virtual object: tennis ball, plastic ball, and sponge ball. This video shows the evaluation. They put on the HMD and hold Transtiff with the tracker. They then touch the top of the virtual sphere using Transtiff. They then select the material that best matches the stiffness of Transtiff. This slide shows the result of the evaluation. We calculated the perception probability and confusion matrix for each material. As you can see from the results, maximum stiffness Transtiff was shown to represent the stiffness of a tennis ball. Half stiffness Transtiff represents the stiffness of a plastic ball. And minimum stiffness Transtiff represents the stiffness of a sponge ball. Therefore, Transtiff can reproduce the haptic sensation of a virtual object by combining haptic and visual stimuli and provide stiffness haptic feedback for virtual object. Next, I will talk about the discussion. Lengthening the joint decreases the maximum stiffness while increasing the bendable displacement. A larger displacement allows for deeper depression of the virtual object. Trade-off exists between the torque and rotational speed. Although a higher rotational speed is necessary for real-time stiffness controls, sufficient torque is also crucial. Finally, I will talk about the contributions. Our experiments demonstrated that a soft stylus and visual cues can create the illusion of softness in a hard object. We developed a stylus with a McKeven-Aushan muscle to render haptic stiffness. User studies confirms that our interface effectively alters perceived stiffness in virtual object. Thank you for listening.